There's just over a week left until Ontario's provincial election, with PC leader Doug Ford still ahead in the polls. The fight over who can catch him is heating up.
I'm reaching out today to NDP voters, and I'm asking them, if you want to change our healthcare system, please vote for Ontario's Liberals.
I mean, that just tells you everything you need to know about that party, where they're at, right? Their path is they're just trying to make party status. My focus is and continues to be flipping blue seats to orange.
Meanwhile, Green Party leader Mike Schreiner remains the only leader who has released a full platform. And while Ford made this appearance on the debate stage on Monday, he hasn't taken questions from reporters in Ontario for over a week. So can Ford's challengers seize this quiet to change the narrative in the election? Bonnie Crombie is the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, and she joins me now. Hi, Bonnie. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me today.
So Canadians are experiencing a lot of disruption right now, and a lot of it's related to that trade war that we could possibly be facing with President Trump. Why should the people of Ontario kick out Doug Ford, the guy who's kind of been leading us through that fight, and replace him with someone like you?
Well, let's not forget that Doug Ford actually supports Donald Trump while knowing that we were going to enter into this trade war and that Donald Trump would impose punitive tariffs on us. So I think that's a good reason to start. Also, he's not at his desk doing his job, protecting our jobs. He's only trying to protect his job. He's running away from an RCMP investigation. There was lots of opportunity for Doug Ford to insulate our economy, set us up for growth, to create jobs, but he hasn't. Jobs are leaving the province. We have the highest unemployment rate that we've had in decades, and we're not prepared for this.
I mean, I take that point, but, you know, this is the guy who was just at the White House last week, right? He's had a conversation with Howard Lutnick, the incoming Commerce Secretary, who will be responsible for imposing these tariffs on Canada. He's been on Fox News. He's a fixture on American TV. He's been making the case constantly. His government rolled out ads. They have some sort of plan, I take it, to deal with these tariffs if they come into place. Is there not a risk if that he's turfed now? These tariffs are supposed to come in March 4th. You might not even have a government together in time to respond.
You've said so much there. I think Howard Lutnick met with Don LeBlanc, and that's who we're negotiating with, our Prime Minister and our Minister of Finance, who have a plan. And what we need is a very strong Team Canada approach. Yes, they're running ads. Why haven't they built relationships until now? Those are hundreds of millions of dollars worth of ads now. And by the way, I would hope you would take exception that they're running ads rather than in the U.S. at $1.3 million on Fox and Friends, rather than here in Canada speaking to our audiences directly. Why isn't he protecting our jobs? He's protecting his own job by calling this election, creating more instability and insecurity right now when we need it the least.
Is there not a risk, though, that we're caught flat-footed if there's a change in government in the middle of this fight? Is there not a risk that Ontario will not be prepared to fight back if you're brought in now?
There is no difference in the way I would have responded to this as Doug Ford has. Quite frankly, there is not a light shine between us. We need a strong Team Canada approach. We need all the premiers united. We need to put up retaliatory tariffs if that's what's needed, and I'll be there continuing the battle.
You pitched yourself as something of a moderate during the Liberal leadership race, fiscally responsible. Obviously, from your time as being mayor, you had to run a balanced budget every year, right, by law, so you have those bona fides. But now you're asking progressive NDP voters to back you. How should voters view you? Are you a moderate, or are you a left-wing progressive that's more comfortable with the NDP?
That's a great question. I'm a centrist. I believe in strong fiscal management. I was a great steward of our finances in Mississauga, as you have pointed out. I attracted jobs. I attracted hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment. We prospered. We're the second largest economy in Mississauga because of the efforts of Hazel McCallion and myself continuing to bring in growth. So that's the same approach that I would take. Now, why did I pitch myself in that way? Because 2.5 million people don't have a family doctor. I have a plan. Doug Ford has not made our life more affordable. I ask people all the time, is your life more affordable today than it was 7 years ago? The answer is clearly not. I have a plan to cut taxes, take the HST off your home heating and hydro, and reduce and put money back in your paycheck, by the way, $1,150 every month. So if you agree and you want to have a family doctor, we need to change the government. And to change the government, I'm asking for everyone to come on side and get behind me. And yes, I appealed to NDP voters. We were in Hamilton at the time, and it was predominantly NDP ridings. But we need everyone to come behind us so we can change the government. And as you well can see, I have the wind and the sails beneath and behind me, and we're kind of showing a little bit of momentum right now, and I'm very pleased about that. But I won't let the voters down, much like I didn't let the people down in Mississauga. And despite the criticisms, Doug Ford stood in the legislature and praised me as mayor. He praised the efforts I made to bring investment and create jobs in Mississauga. I'm very proud of that, and people rewarded me for my stable management style, that strong fiscal responsibility that I inherited from Hazel McCallion. I learned from her, and I continued that, and I got 78% of the vote for doing that.
With the NDP outreach, though, some are suggesting that's you trying to bid for second place, that you've given up on contending for power. You just want to hold the NDP off for you can get back to official party status at Queen's Park. Marit Stiles said something similar today. You're just trying to make party status by appealing to her voters. Are you still contending for government, or is this a race for second place?
This is how you win government. To bring change forward. I'm offering something different. Doug Ford has had 7 years to deliver. He didn't do it. He said he'd cut our taxes. He didn't do it. He said he'd end hallway medicine. He didn't do it. He said he'd build 1.5 million homes. He didn't do it. I will. I have a plan. If you want to have a family doctor and you want $1,150 back every year because I'm going to cut your taxes, then you should get behind the Ontario Liberals.
Your campaign released a fairly lengthy list of perceived Doug Ford failures, and some of the things that you're mentioning, he didn't deliver on the tax cut, healthcare is still a major issue, more spending, unemployment is the second highest in the province. Quite a lengthy list of things that you take issue with Doug Ford. But my question is, why haven't you been able to punch through? If things are so bad and he is such a disappointment, why are the polls still suggesting that you are not poised to beat him just yet?
JP, it's an excellent question. And I think the answer is this. People are struggling. Many people are working multiple jobs to make ends meet. They get up in the morning, they work long shifts, they come home, they've got their children at home, they're cooking dinner and putting food on the table. Doug Ford has been spending hundreds of millions of your dollars on advertising, whether here in Ontario or abroad, and it's been consuming the airways, quite frankly, but it's starting to break through. Now that people are realizing that in 9 days we're going to have an election, they're starting to look at the alternatives. And I think the Ontario Liberals present a very strong alternative. If you don't like your life today and you want to change the fact that you don't have a family doctor and you want to put money back in your pocket, have your taxes cut, vote Ontario Liberals.
You've obviously made healthcare kind of the centerpiece of your campaign. I was reading through the party's 2003 Liberal Party platform today. Some of the things in that document are quite similar to what you're proposing now. They said, we believe you should be able to see a family doctor when you need one. They promised to increase medical residency spots, make it easier for foreign-trained doctors to practice here. So some of the things Dalton McGuinty was talking about 22 years ago and didn't necessarily get done are some of the things that you're now pitching. Why is it different this time? Why can voters trust you to deliver on healthcare when Liberals in the past haven't always delivered?
Well, I have a record of delivering, but I do know that 2 million more people had a family doctor back then. We didn't close ERs back then, and we've closed them 1,200 times last year. We didn't have 11,000 people dying waiting for care, for treatment, or for surgery, or 2,000 people getting treated in a hallway or an auditorium. These things have to change, and that I'm going to make it my top priority to change.
Doug Ford hasn't taken questions from the media in the last week. He's kind of been, obviously he was at the debate, but we haven't seen much of him recently. What can you do in the final week of this campaign to shake things up, to take on Doug Ford and win this thing? Based on the polls, you're not there yet, but you have some time. What can you do if Doug Ford's not necessarily front and center?
Trying to build up some momentum like I'm doing here today. I've been a wonderful day here in Ottawa, meeting people, doing a lot of media, trying to break through. And let me say, Doug Ford's hiding. He doesn't want to take accountability for his actions. The fact that he's got a record of broken promises, things he hasn't delivered for Ontarians. And the fact that he called an early, unnecessary election when he had a year and a half left in his mandate. Why? To outrun an RCMP investigation. And he doesn't want to be held accountable to the people, so they have him at home hiding. You know, in the 50% of the time that since he's called this election, he's not been available. He was in Washington for 2 days meeting with some junior level advisors and taking photo ops, but he's not been out meeting the people or the media. He hasn't attended one of the scrums post our debates. He's hiding. He doesn't want to be held accountable. and I'm going to try and hold him accountable.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much to Ontario Liberal Party leader Bonnie Crombie. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
It's been 9 days since Ford made a public appearance and took questions from reporters, other than the debate on Monday night, of course. The Power Panel is back with me, Amanda Alvaro, James Moore, Matthew Dubé, and Sherelle Evelyn. Hey, guys, thanks for coming back. So, Amanda, let's talk about this. Okay, Doug Ford's in hiding, perhaps, and he hasn't been seen, but he's leading. He's winning. I mean, every single poll suggests that he's got an insurmountable lead, maybe, at this point. Bonnie Crombie was on the show earlier today saying, yeah, though, I'm going to still try and take him on. And I think I've got a case to make. But she's kind of stuck in that 25 to 30% range. How does she break through?
Yeah, and listen, if this was a 2-month election campaign, maybe she could get there, and who knows, maybe she still can. But she's found some momentum. She's certainly, she's increased improved the fortunes of the Ontario Liberal Party for sure. I mean, all of that is good news. But I think the truth is we've seen what the issues are that are dominating this election. And top of mind for Ontarians is cost of living, followed very closely with how to deal with Trump and the Trump tariffs. And Ford has really effectively positioned himself as a bit of that Captain Canada figure. He's occupied that space. So when you ask Ontarians, who do you trust most to deal with some of the issues that are currently facing the province? And if you believe one of those top issues is the Trump tariffs, which of course it is, then he leads. He's at like 45%. At the same time, when you look at the issues that she's really tried to make, percolate to the top of this list, like healthcare in particular, she's really closed the gap on healthcare and education. But healthcare and education have kind of fallen further down that list. So this becomes a timing issue for her. The issues that she's talking about seem to not be resonating as much as the ones that he is. And the fact that he's gone into hiding is just because they're really concerned about him making a mistake in these final days. A critical mistake could change the trajectory of this election, and they are not going to risk or gamble that at this juncture.
James?
Yeah, I think Amanda did a really nice précis there of the status of the campaign. There's a British Columbian looking at this from the outside. Doug Ford called the campaign. He called it because I think he had a pretty clear pathway towards what re-election would look like and what he would want his narrative to be. I think it's not a strong argument for Marit Stiles or for Bonnie Crombie to say, Doug Ford is hiding. Where is Doug Ford? Well, he called the campaign. He was prepared to be judged. And Doug Ford is one of the, most well-known politicians in all of the country, all the way out in British Columbia to PEI. Everybody knows what Doug Ford looks like, sounds like, talks like, what his priorities are and what his presentation would be in a coming mandate. To sort of say Doug Ford's hiding, I don't think that Doug will hunt very well. So I think he's run a front-runner campaign. I think he's done very well. We'll see how the last few weeks of the campaign goes. But I think a core question when you're an incumbent government running for re-election is, if you voted for the PCs in the last election and the election before that, why would you not vote for them again? And, New Democrats and Liberals can go through the laundry list of things that, are their emphasis, their priorities or whatever. But if you voted for the PCs before, if you voted for Doug Ford before, there's no reason you wouldn't vote for him again. Just come out and so it's up for Ford's campaign to get those voters animated and motivated enough to turn out and vote for him, because there's nothing really in his campaign and there's nothing that's really happened in the past 4 years that would lead a PC voter to be dissatisfied to the point that they would vote for Bonnie Crombie or certainly Marit Stiles.
Matthew, what do you make of Bonnie Crombie's direct appeal to NDP voters, as she's essentially saying, Liberals do this all the time. I'm not saying this is something new, but she's quite vocal about it, blatant about it, like, don't vote for them, vote for me. And she's trying to say, Marit Stiles, you're not going to get much change if you go for her. I actually have a possibility of getting government. I can take on Doug Ford. I'm the better pick. Do you think that has the potential to help her, boost her, give her wind in her sails, as she was suggesting she has in my interview with her? Or is that just a losing proposition at this point? Because it's the NDP that's the official opposition, right? Like, the Liberals are third party. They don't even have official party status at Queen's Park.
Yeah, I've experienced this firsthand, secondhand, thirdhand. It's the eternal exhaustion of a New Democrat of facing the strategic vote argument. And it's particularly frustrating when, in theory, the NDP should be the government in waiting as the official opposition. And I think one of the issues I've had, and you see examples of this both federally and provincially all over the place, is that most often the strategic vote ends up playing out in a riding where the fight is between a Liberal and a New Democrat anyway. And so you often end up losing a strong incumbent New Democrat MPP or MP on the federal scene, as it were, in favor of a Liberal, for a Liberal party that will end up maybe getting party status, maybe forming official opposition, and no real change to the status quo. And I think that's the disingenuous part that's really frustrating for New Democrats. I mean, she was making some of the most pointed appeals in this regard that you referred to in Hamilton, where, you know, where it's very working class, it's very New Democrat. You've got, you know, the steel workers there who are longtime supporters of New Democrat policies because New Democrats have fought for them, particularly in light of what's going on with Donald Trump now. The mayor is the former NDP leader. So it's a bit disingenuous to go into NDP heartland and then say, you know, if you really want to take the fight to Doug Ford, you should be going into ridings where there's a possibility of unseating a Conservative. And so I think that's really when Marit Stiles' response in saying that this is a fight for Liberals to get party status is genuine, because if the fight was really about getting rid of Doug Ford, you would be going to places where you can actually do that and not places where you'd be unseating New Democrats for your own partisan gain.
Yeah, like the Mississaugas, all those ridings where she's from. Sherelle?
Yeah, clearly, Doug Ford is running against Donald Trump. He's not running against Bonnie Crombie. He's not running against Marit Stiles. He's not running against Mike Schreiner. He knows where this campaign is, and that's where he's doing. Where is he going to be in the end of this week? In Washington. Like, he's not going to be, you know, on the hustings in Ontario. He knows kind of on which side his bread is buttered on. I heard a radio ad just this morning that was all about, you know, Trump, Donald Trump, a little bit of anti-Trudeau, and then it kind of wraps up with like, oh, hey, Doug Ford, he's our guy. So he knows what he's doing, and that's the whole reason for this campaign. That's why he called it. And letting the other parties kind of fight amongst themselves for that second place position, I think he's clearly fine with that. The tactic of not being very present in the campaign, that's something that we've seen before in the last provincial election. You know, PC candidates didn't participate in debates. Doug Ford wasn't, you know, all that present. So, and it's a winning strategy. So why would they kind of, you know, break it, fix it if it's not broken?
Yeah, Amanda, I mean, is it just so hard to beat Ford on the tariff issue? Because really that's what people are thinking about right now, right? I mean, I take Bonnie's point that healthcare is not great. I've done many stories on this. The provincial healthcare situation is not great. 2.5 million people do not have a family doctor. There is a healthcare issue to contend with, but that's just not necessarily top of mind right now, isn't it? And so that's really what's making it hard for Bonnie and Marit, frankly, to punch through.
Exactly. I mean, we see consistency around healthcare being a top 5 issue. Usually it occupies the 1, 2, 3 space, and it's not right now. It's fallen down, it's single digits, it's behind some of these other issues like cost of living, Trump tariffs, housing affordability. And on the Trump tariffs in particular, it's getting a disproportionate amount of airtime. So because it's getting a disproportionate amount of airtime, it means that he's getting a disproportionate amount of airtime as it relates to that topic. That's why, again, classic front-runner campaign, he doesn't need to be out taking questions on some of these other topics, especially where he's more vulnerable. He's more vulnerable on topics like healthcare and education. He doesn't want to be asked questions about that. He wants to be controlling the narrative. He wants to be talking about the Trump tariffs because he's trusted in that territory. Again, when we look at the polls, we see 45% of Ontarians believe that he is the person who's most trusted to deal with the issues facing Ontario right now, and top of mind for Ontarians are the Trump tariffs. So again, this is the strategy for them. It's why they went to a snap election, because he was soaring in the polls from a popularity standpoint. But credit where credit is due, Bonnie Crombie has really increased the fortunes of the Ontario Liberal Party. She is gaining momentum. She is closing that gap. Is it enough between now and next week? Probably not, but she's doing her part in terms of, you know, real leadership and getting her message out.
Yeah, James, I mean, there has been a little bit of an uptick for Crombie and the Liberals. I mean, the PCs were running attack ads against her, too. They paid for what was probably a very expensive slot on the Team Canada-USA game on Saturday night, attacking her on taxes, you know, an unflattering ad about her and her party. Is that a sign that they see some vulnerability, the PCs, or do you think they just got cash to spend?
Probably the latter, but job's not done until the job's done, right? Until the last vote's counted, all that stuff. But look, whenever there's a lot of uncertainty, and there is a lot of uncertainty, incumbent governments benefit because people like to try to control it. It's a Darwinian instinct that we have as human beings to control the things that we can control because of the fear of the things that we can't. This was true with Stephen Harper in his re-election in 2008 in the global economic recession. It was true of Justin Trudeau in certainly his last campaign going through the pandemic election campaign. The other provincial governments did the same thing as well. David Eby benefited from that in British Columbia. Scott Moe did as well. When there's uncertainty, people don't really want to change government, because anytime you change government, there is some uncertainty that a cabinet minister won't fulfill their mandate, the premier won't be quite what you hope they were, and all that. So I think Doug Ford certainly benefits from that, and emphasizing the uncertainty that is Donald Trump, I think, is sort of his benefit in a roundabout way. If there's a threat to Doug Ford, by the way, I don't think it's Bonnie Crombie having some wind in her sails because she talks about healthcare. The biggest vulnerability of Doug Ford is actually not to the middle and not to the left; it's to the right. It's people who are conservatives who don't think that Doug Ford has been sufficiently conservative when it comes to the fiscal framework, to controlling spending, on the tax question, and to keeping control of some of the sort of cost measures that conservatives have their real eye on. There's real anxiety out there about the subnational levels of debt that the government and the province of Ontario are burdening on top of the federal levels of debt, and that uncertainty about the solvency of the province going forward. So the vulnerability is not to the center, it's to the right, and people on the right staying home. And I think that's probably why you maybe see a little less of Doug Ford, because some of those questions that may get asked from the parties on the left may force him to sort of seem a little bit more moderate than the voters on the right might be interested in hearing about in the last few days.
That's interesting. Matthew?
Well, it's kind of funny, actually, because we're talking about the premier in hiding, and yet it doesn't feel that way. And I think that's what really matters to voters, right? Is that you kind of get this sense that through the coverage, or even the references to him in absentia are enough to make up that groundwork, or that do that legwork, rather, and leading up to the election next week. And I also think, I agree with a lot of what James said. Where I would disagree is, I think, on the vulnerability to the right. I think that's even why the Liberals even made a mistake emphasizing his hot mic moment, right? Because as much as I'm loath to admit it, I don't think my feelings on President Trump are a secret. But I do think that this notion of looking towards a populist president and saying, oh, I kind of like that guy, but now he's betrayed us. Certainly not a sentiment that I agree with. I am happy that Bonnie Crombie disagrees with that and wants to attack the premier on that. But I think there's a lot of folks who kind of feel that way about the American American situation in general, right? That, oh, the U.S. is a friend. We like some of what they do, but now they've betrayed us. And I think there's a lot of moments that have been arguably even calculated, right? It sometimes makes you feel like that episode of The West Wing where he knew the light was on, right? The hot mic moment. Right. It kind of makes you wonder if some of this stuff is almost deliberate. I feel the same way about the Prime Minister a couple weeks ago, to be quite honest with you, but that's another matter entirely. So I think the Premier has been successful at threading that needle, and I do think that what incentive is there? Unfortunately, I wish it weren't so, but I just, to the point Sherelle was making earlier and that others have made as well, there's really no incentive to do anything more, especially when you're so, it sounds like a weird way to say it, but omnipresent, right? Yeah. Despite your absence. So
I didn't even realize he was gone that long, frankly. I'm a reporter. I should know these things. I didn't realize he hadn't spoken to the press in that long. Sherelle, quick final word to you.
Yeah, maybe just picking up a little on something what James said, is talking about who's not going to come out to vote. Is that really the only potential opportunity for some of these other parties, for the Liberals, to make up some of that ground? Is if everybody is thinking, well, nothing's going to change. We know Doug Ford, he's a known quantity, or he's not quite what we want. And it's February, it's cold. Like, are the people who are comfortable, are they going to stay home as opposed to coming out and actually wanting to vote for change? I don't think that there's enough of people to really make up that difference. But, maybe the result could be slightly closer than the polls indicate just because of that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks to the Power Panel, Amanda Alvaro, James Moore, Matthew Dubé, and Sherelle Evelyn. Thanks for coming on tonight.